It's good. Hey, today we are wrapping up the book of Judges. And I just want to kind of remind you, as we read throughout the entire book of Judges, we see this progressive slide. It starts small at first with small compromises, but that's how it happens. It's small compromises that are cumulative in time. And by the end of the book of Judges, the last judge we read, Samson, is really, while he is a hero in many VBS type things, he's a bad guy. Bad guy, self-centered, self-interested. We see as this slide starts, while it's small at first, but as the morality and the loyalty to God, it starts to roll downhill, it picks up speed and soars at neck-breaking speeds. I want to remind you of the scope of the book of Judges as we wrap up today. The first couple, chapter and a half or so, chapter 2, verse 5 is a summary of Joshua, chapters 13 through 19. Just summary, and we see there that the people of God made small compromises, small at first, grew in time. The majority of the book of Judges is about individual judges, individual accounts of this sin cycle. The people do what's evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord hands them over to a foreign power for a season where they are oppressed. Eventually, they cry out to God in repentance. God raises up a ruler, a leader, a judge who will lead them into a season of victory and peace, and things will be good as long as that judge lives, but once he dies, then the cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. As we close the book of Judges today, chapter 17 through 21, we kind of take a step back and instead of looking at individual accounts, I believe this is given to us as a picture to step back and see the moral landscape, the spiritual landscape of the nation during this time. What we're going to read today is by far what I would consider some of the darkest text in the Bible. It's gross, it's heartbreaking. It's really the climax of the book of Judges. If we were to divide this into two sections, I would put chapters 17 and 18 describing what you could call the degeneration of the spiritual life of Israel, followed by chapters 19 through 21, which describes the degeneration of the moral life of Israel. And what we see in kind of a broad stroke here is spiritual degeneration inevitably leads to moral degeneration. It all centers around this one idea that we've picked at every week, highlighted in chapter 17, verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It's that refrain that captures the core of this book. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But how do we understand this idea of in those days there was no king in Israel? Should we read that, interpret that to be, oh, here's the solution. If only they had a king, they wouldn't be going through this. I want to suggest to you, no. This isn't about replacing a king. In fact, we see when they establish a king in 1 Samuel chapter 12, the King Saul, the first king, it doesn't end up well. To suggest a king would be the solution to the problem isn't the great picture here. I want to ask you to think just a moment, what is government? What would the king and a government look like? Do you know what the default form of human government is? The default form of human government is a gang. It really is. And who leads that gang? Well, the biggest guy, right? The most powerful person. And the gang leader with the most weapons and the strongest forces, we eventually will call a king. The first king that we read about is in Genesis chapter 10, this guy named Nimrod. Nimrod built a large nation. He was a mighty warrior. According to Jewish literature outside of the Bible, he is, while the Bible we read that he is over the region of Babel. Jewish literature tells us that he is the one that oversaw the building of the Tower of Babel. In Jewish literature, of course, Nimrod is the grandson of Noah, and he thought, well, I'm going to build a tower in case a flood ever happens again, according to the Jewish literature. That's what his motive was. However, we know that God comes down, he confuses the languages, he separates the people into language groups, eventually forming nations, and every generation, every nation has some type of a kingly figure whose desire is to conquer others. And as the kingdoms grow with military advancements from rocks to sticks to spears to bombs today, kings want to rule. Now, when Israel was brought out of Egypt, God gave them a new standard. Prior to the book of Judges, God gave them a new standard, and the standard was this: the Lord will reign. The Lord will be the king. In Deuteronomy 33, we see the Lord became king in Israel. That's a pet name. Jerusalem is a pet name for Israel. The Lord became king. This is the idea of the Israelite people. God is our king. After all, God is the one who had established their laws. He's the one that went before them in the fighting. He's the one who led the people, but that wasn't enough, not for the Israelites. Even with the promise where God says, you'll be a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. A holy nation, meaning you'll be set apart, you'll be different from other nations. However, in Judges, in those days, there was no king. The people did what was right in their own eyes. They lived for themselves. They forsook the Lord and his ways. They forsook his commandments. What we see throughout the book of Judges is this reoccurring issue that would have been solved if the people would have let God rule. But instead they were going off on their own, doing their own thing, instead of letting God be in his rightful place as king. In these days, there was no king. And when God is not the king, the people will rule themselves by their own standards. And when mankind rules themselves by their own standards, well, things are going to get bad. When the standard of right and wrong comes down to my opinion, things will go bad. You know, there's this idea today that people are generally good. People are generally good, not according to the Bible. Now notice here, in those days there was no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The idea here is they're doing what they think is right. They haven't abandoned the concept of right and wrong. They've just rejected God's definition of right and wrong. How do we replace right and wrong? How do we replace what's right in God's eyes and what's right in my eyes? Think about this in terms of our world today. What's the standard of right and wrong? Who gets to decide? Who makes that choice? How do you evaluate what's right? Should it be evaluated on popular opinion? Well, let's have a vote. How's that work out? Should we evaluate what's right and what's wrong by trusting the professionals? After all, they're professionals. Well, who's other professionals? Well, the other professionals. Think about the issues that drive our news cycle today. Think about sexual ethics for just a moment. Of course, you've got LGBTQ stuff. That's a hot topic in our world today. Well, what's right? You know, can I just say with that, the much more overlooked and socially accepted, even within the church, is a sexual ethic that's still contrary to the Bible. However, it's often ignored. You know, today is June 1st, and so you'll see a lot of this stuff in the next several weeks throughout the month of June. Can I just remind the people of God, there's one thing to be frustrated with the sexual ethic of our world, but can I just point out that the sexual ethic that's embraced largely by the church, that's still contrary to the Bible, is couples engaging in sexual activity outside of marriage? That's an issue. It's what the Bible calls sin. See, God's design for sex is for a man and a woman in a covenant relationship of marriage. Anything outside of that is sin. And so while we prepare for this month ahead, can I just remind you that we need to be consistent with the biblical standard as well. I'm not saying not call out sin. I'm just saying be reminded that anything outside of God's design for sex is sin, whether it's gay or straight. Think about issues of life and abortion. Who decides what's right? Who says one life is more valuable than the other? Who gets the right to terminate life? Do we trust the doctors? Do we trust scientists? Do we trust companies that are selling the body parts? Is this something that we should leave to the government? What about issues concerning materialism and wealth? Much of the teaching in our world that's targeted to our children is defining success by what you have and what you earn, how much you save, and the car you drive. And it's about maintaining an image in our world. Is that right? Is that good? Is that noble? Is that the right pursuit of life? Who defines success? Who defines what's right and what's wrong? Who defines what we want to teach our children? See, what we see in the last few chapters of the book of Judges are two areas where the people have done what's right in their own eyes, and the result is degeneration. The first area is in the spiritual realm, the religious realm. See, the core, God has given us the understanding and clarity as to who he is through his word. He's defined the laws, and he's defined the rules for engagement, how we're to engage with him and with others. And in chapter 17 of Judges, we see the spiritual degeneration, exampled by a man and his mother and his son. Chapter 17, verse 1, there was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, Mom, the 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoken in my ears, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be my son by the Lord. I just want to point out as we read here, the word that's used here, Lord, is Yahweh. It's God's name. It's the name. This is not just a generic, blessed must be by the gods, but Yahweh. It points our attention to the fact that this mother and this son they know of Yahweh. They believe that they're worshiping Yahweh. Look what happens in verse 3. He restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. His mother said, the silver, I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son to make a carved image and a metal image, and therefore I will restore it to you. Here's the thing. She's clearly violating, her son is clearly violating God's rules. I mean, this is one of the top 10. He restored the money to his mother. His mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to a silversmith who made a carved image, a metal image, and it was in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods and ordained one of his sons who became a priest. Why? Well, in those days there was no king, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Here we have three generations, Micah, his mother, and his son. The conversation goes like this. Micah, the son, had stolen money from his mother, the equivalent to about $9,000 today. Mother utters a curse. He hears it. Because of the curse, he comes to his mother and says, hey, Mom, guess what? It was me. I stole it. I bring it back to you. She says, well, blessed by God to you. Let's take this money and let's build some idols. Let's build a shrine. Let's make an ephod. Let's make this religion. Micah builds a shrine in the ephod, and they set up their own kind of worship. He installs his son as a faux priest. She's not qualified to be a priest. I want you to see what's happening here is they are making a twisted religion. All of this came from Micah, not from God. It came from Micah's mother and Micah, not from God. This was completely a man-originated, man-created religious system. And therefore, the purpose of the shrine and the ephod and the attractive idols and the establishment of the priesthood was to serve man, not God. You know, this exemplifies the radical individualism marked by the time of Judges. People looked to self to guide their morality and their ethics. And people genuinely felt that they were doing what was right, but they measured it by their own eyes. Much like today. Today in our world, we hear a lot of this follow your heart type thinking. That's the ideal state of our modern culture. Yet Bible and common sense tell us that this kind of moral, spiritual, and social anarchy leads to destruction. It seemed right in the eyes of Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, but God said it was wrong. It seemed right in the eyes of the sons of Jacob to sell Joseph into slavery, but God said it was wrong. It seemed right in the eyes of King David to commit adultery with Bathsheba, cover it up with murder, but God said it was wrong. It might have seemed right in the eyes of Judas to betray Jesus, but God said it was wrong. Proverbs 14:12 says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it's the way to death. When a man follows his own instincts, apart from the redeemed nature of the converted person, it's going to lead to ruin. We need to follow God's way, not our own. Yet this pattern of man-pleasing religion continues to be common in many religions and churches today. Can I just be honest for a moment? And this is where I risk offending you, okay? When we gather here on Sunday mornings or Thursday nights, we gather here to worship God through song and through study of God's word. Our task in our songs and our sermons are not to make you feel good, but to point you to the one who is good. To point you to his goodness, his holiness, his righteousness. But sometimes we make statements to ourselves, or maybe you caught yourself making a statement. And I think sometimes these statements might reveal the posture of our heart. Let's say you get in the car today and you're leaving here and you say, you know what, I just really didn't like worship today. Can I tell you a secret? No one was singing to you. It's not about you. It's not to you. You're not the object of our songs. I'm not the object of our songs. You say, well, I didn't like the message today. Sorry. I mean, I get it. I get it. Our job is to teach God's words, point to his glory. Sometimes I get a note and say, I'm leaving the church, there's nothing here for me. You're quite right. Nothing we do here is for you. It's for him. And we are engaged and encouraged to join our worship to him, to join with him in what he's doing in our world. It's not for us. There was a time when preachers would preach the Bible, call sin by God's standards, and call people to repent. But now, and watch throughout this month, you see many churches are more concerned with keeping people happy. They say things out loud or quietly by their non-speak. Well, we wouldn't dare offend you or upset you. How dare we judge you for sinning? After all, we're all sinners, they say weekly. And we wonder why churches are closing left and right. God's command to his people, Israel, to be distinct, to be a different people. And that still stands for us today. Be different, live distinct. Don't follow the pattern of this world, Paul says in Romans, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then you'll know. You'll be able to test and approve what's pleasing and perfect. We wonder why churches are closing left and right, because they are indistinguishable from the world. So in chapter 17, we see the degeneration of religion. There's more we could say about chapter 17, but let's skip ahead to verse 19, because where spiritual degeneration happens, it inevitably leads to moral degeneration. Look at chapter 19, verse 1. In those days, again, there was no king in Israel. And a certain Levite was traveling in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, and he took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for some 4 months. Pause there for just a moment. I just want to point out, because in every translation of the Bible, because language is not binary, there's always interpretive stances that have to be made here. I want to point out in the ESV, it says the concubine was unfaithful to him. And you got to wonder, how does that line up with the rest of the account that we'll read about him and her and all of this? It could also be translated, and actually the way I think it leans to is the concubine was upset with him, which changes a little bit of what you might think about this concubine, okay? There's good debate as to what those words ought to be, whether she's upset with him or whether he's upset with her for being unfaithful. But anyway, there's an interpretive choice that the ESV Council has made in that verse. Let's move on, because that's not really the the thrust of the account. She leaves for 4 months. She's gone. Eventually, in verse 3, her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. That makes sense if she's upset with him, right? He had with him his servants and a couple of donkeys. And she brought him to her father's house. When the girl's father saw him, he came to meet him with joy. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay. And he remained there with him 3 days so that he ate and drank and spent the night there. Let me just pause and point out a few things here. First of all, this Levite has a concubine. Literally, it means a second-class wife. And this, on its face, demonstrates that moral constraint had been thrown out the window. A second-class wife. What is this Levite doing with a concubine? You know, sometimes we read in the Old Testament, we come across people who have multiple wives and concubines. Don't ever get confused asking, did God accept this? Was this appropriate in God's eyes? Absolutely not. It wasn't. God had made his stance clear in Genesis 2:24. A man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. God's design of marriage is one man and one woman for life. In the ancient world, this concubine, this literal second-class wife, the husband's responsibility to her would be to provide her with food and clothing and shelter, and she was to provide him with gratification. How is this Levite doing this? In just a few verses here, we see the moral degeneration of the people of Israel. And let me just make another side point here. New Days, Old Demons, right? It's been popular in the past several months. New Days, Old Demons. The objectification of women in our culture, I hope you are aware of this and thinking about this. It's a serious problem today. I hope you're attuned to the fact that the pornography industry is a huge problem today, and that, coupled with the sexual ethic of the day, is leading to some very damaging spiritual and physical issues. See, the Bible teaches that we are made in the image of God, yet when people are objectified, as this concubine was, as many are in our world today, not only through the pornography industry, but also through the dating culture, when people are objectified, they're reduced as mere tools. They're stripped of dignity and of worth, which violates the biblical principle of viewing others with honor and respect as children of God. The pornography industry and the dating culture of today is leading to a distorted view of relationships and intimacy. And instead of viewing marriage as something sacred, our world today sees it as something transactional. This is a huge, huge problem. And it's something that we can do something about. This fall, and I'll just mention it to prime your pumps a little bit, this fall we're going to be rolling out some marriage enrichment stuff. I hope you take note of this fall. What the church needs to do is model and display and teach about healthy marriage relationships. Okay, let's get back on task. Concubines. The husband's concubine, the concubine's husband stays with them well into the 5th day, if you read the account. And eventually they leave late in the day. They don't go far before nightfall. They realize that they're going to be out traveling. They need a place to stay. And so they pass Jerusalem, because at that time, Jerusalem is led by Canaanite people. And they go past Jerusalem to Gibeah, because Gibeah is ran by Israelites. It's an Israelite town at this point. And their thinking is, we will be safe amongst our people. As was the custom, you'd go into the town and you would stay at the square, and someone, it was custom that someone would come and offer hospitality for you, take them into their house. So the man and his concubine and the servant and the donkeys, they go into the center of town and they wait, and no one offers hospitality. No one offers hospitality. Finally, another guy comes in to town, an older man, and he comes in verse 20. He says, "Peace to you, I'll care for your wants, only don't spend the night in the square." I wondered if he knew what was about to happen. He brought them into his house, and he gave the donkeys feed, and he washed their feet, and he ate and drank. We see here this picture of hospitality, of beautiful hospitality. And as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house. Beating on the door, they said to the old man, to the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." I just want to point out to you that is veiled speech, and I hope you understand what that means. If you're familiar with other parts of the Old Testament, you might be familiar with a similar account in Genesis chapter 19 with the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. There is a big difference here, however. These people in Judges 19, they are Israelites. They are God's people. They have the law. They know the law. Verses 23 through 30 provide the horrific details. The men of the city bang on the walls, demanding that the man be brought out so that they may know him. This threat of brutal homosexuality. The father, the one who was hospitable at first, he's willing to turn over his daughter and the man's concubine to this crazed mob of men. Instead of protecting and defending them to the point of being willing to die for them, he's willing to hand them over. We don't know what happens with the man's daughter, but we know that the concubine is turned out to be abused by the men of the town. We read of the death of this woman. She because of her injuries and this abuse she sustains, she is killed. She crawls herself back to the threshold of the house, and that next morning the husband opens the door and steps over her lifeless body and mutters, "Get up, let's go." Eventually he takes his wife's body back to his home, where he cuts her into 12 pieces and sends her to the 12 tribes of Israel as a calling card of sorts to go to war against Benjamin. The people did what was right in their own eyes. This account is sick, it's repulsive, it's immoral, it's horrifying, but this is what happens when people do what's right in their own eyes. It's God's intention that these chapters would shock us, which is why they're at the closing of the book of Judges. And that's why it's so significant for us, because we are moving at the speed of light to a time in our own nation that resembles the nation of Israel during the time of Judges. It's appalling to see what people, human beings, are capable of doing when we reject God's definition of right and wrong and we replace it with our own. See, no society is safe when it operates independent of God's definition of right and wrong, good and bad. Just like in the time of Judges, people today are doing what they're doing, thinking it's right, and in the process rejecting God's definition of things and thinking that they're right. When God's word and his standards are rejected, well, we end up with a society that degenerates. Think about how people talk about our world today, people speaking glowing and positive terms about how enlightened and progressive our society has become. The definition of progressive in our culture is to be more enlightened and more forward-thinking. So we think to ourselves with what C.S. Lewis calls as a chronological snobbery. We think to ourselves, well, we're more advanced, we're more sophisticated than these heathens in Judges chapter 19. This leads us to accept this new reality, a morality that evolves with the passage of time. Now we live in a world where you recreate yourself in whatever image you want because you are the arbiter of truth, of right and wrong, according to our culture. You know, in the first 200 years of American history, people pretty much agreed on what was right and what was wrong. Because of our Constitution, our laws are shaped with a biblical worldview of our founding fathers. Did you know that 29 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence had a seminary or Bible school degree? This is why the founding document referred to the laws of nature and nature's God. By referring to the laws of nature, nature's God, the signers of the document declared that the source of natural law came from God. Now, they didn't establish a theocracy, but what they did do was establish a nation whose foundation rests upon the universal, foundational, eternal laws of God. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, anytime this comes out, people say, well, yeah, but what about slavery? What about all these dark, horrific parts of our American history? You're right, it was a horrific time, but can I point out that there was largely people of faith who fought to abolish slavery because they saw the inconsistency with the injustice that was happening and the failure to acknowledge that all people are created in the image and the likeness of God. Yet in the past decade, there's been a bold shift away from what used to be generally accepted as right and wrong. And those values and those morals have been challenged in the classrooms and in the courtrooms and even in the churches. Truth that used to be held as sacred and objective and non-negotiable is now seen as secular and subjective and very negotiable. I want you to hear today, God's definition of right or wrong does not change with the times. He is the ultimate, the objective, the highest standard of truth by which all things should be measured and by which our lives should be measured. You know, here at Leesburg, our mission is to make biblical disciples of Jesus in simply real environments. And we've defined a disciple as one who is following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and committed to his mission. I want to just throw out to you real quickly, throughout history, about every 50 years or so, a revival starts to happen. An awakening starts to happen. The first Great Awakening happened in 1735. About 50-ish years later was the Second Great Awakening, followed by the third and the fourth. I really do believe that we are on the verge of another Great Awakening. Why do I say that? Well, there's many reasons. One, you look at the number of people who are coming to faith. It's an exciting time to live in. The Barna Group, a research group, in April of 2025, they did a survey, and it says that 66% of U.S. adults say that they have made a personal commitment to Jesus that's still important for their life today. Now, this is significant. Why? It marks a 12-point percentage increase since 2021. It was in 2021 when commitment levels reached their lowest in more than 3 decades of Barna tracking. This shift is not only statistically significant, but it might be the clearest indication of a meaningful spiritual renewal in the United States. Why? Well, Jesus told us. Jesus says in John chapter 12, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. See, Jesus is still drawing people to himself just as he promised. The growing number of people making personal commitments to follow him is not random. It's a result of what Jesus is continuing to do in our world today and inviting us to be a part of. The big question is, are we willing to exalt Jesus? Are we willing to lift him up as our highest standard and point to him? If Jesus is drawing people to him, are we willing to lift Jesus up in our conversations? Are we willing to lift Jesus up in our lives and in our invitations? What we also see from this Barna study is that there's a spiritual curiosity that's growing. People are more open to it. People are more open to conversations, and the next generation is leading the way. According to the data, young people, especially young men, are making personal commitments to Jesus at a remarkable rate. And this really does challenge the idea that the next generation has walked away from faith. And in fact, in reality, I think many people are waking up to it. So we have a job to do, Leesburg. We have a job to do. Psalm 145 verse 4 says, one generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. See, the church is at its best when generations speak to one another, telling of what God has done, and the younger generation is open to it. I gotta land. Judges 21:25. Again, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. What they needed was not a man king. We see a man king come in Samuel. It doesn't work out well. What they needed was the true king, and what our world needs today is the king. You know, Jesus, upon his death, burial, and resurrection, when he gathered his disciples on his farewell speech, he told them very clearly, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Do you know what that means? That means he's the king. All authority has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I've commanded you. And behold, keep your eyes on me. Look, he says, pay attention. While you're doing that, behold, I'm with you always. Church, we've got a job to do. What the Israelites needed throughout the book of Judges was the king, was to live by his standards. And what our world needs so desperately now is to live by his standards. And how will they know? if we don't share? How will they know the benefit of living under God's good standards if we're not open and sharing what God has done in our lives? So what's this mean for us? Don't overlook the people around you. The person that you think might be uninterested might be the one that heaven is ready to celebrate. Many people across the country said that they're more open to God more now than ever. Of course, the pandemic is often still a measuring point. That season of disruption has stirred up a deep meaning, a deep hunger for meaning, for hope, for truth. People are spiritually curious. And that's why we're getting ready to start next week a sermon series called You Asked For It. We're in the process now of collecting questions that come in through our app and through the website and social media. And it's my personal commitment to answer every question that comes in. We've had nearly a dozen so far. It's my goal to answer everyone in some way, whether it be from the stage here or in written form or in videos that come out through social media in our app. We want to answer all the questions with the exception of the gotcha questions. If the question's like, why can't we have a better preacher? I can't help you there. I don't know. I'll forward that to Larry. You can take care of that one. What our easy now, easy. What our world needs so desperately now is what the Israelites needed in Judges. They needed the king. And we need to be open-handed, pointing to the king. We need to be living under his good authority, allowing him to lead. And with that, I know that a lot of people have questions and concerns and doubts. In this cultural moment, the church is being pressed hard against. It's important that men and women of faith stand distinct in our world, pointing to a better way and answering these questions with grace and with truth. I'm reminded of Paul's words in Romans chapter 1, and it's my prayer for us. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. In a world that pushes against the wisdom of Scripture, may we be not afraid of the gospel, for it's the power of God at work for salvation for everyone who believes. A few questions to ask. Am I ashamed of the gospel? Will I stand confidently on biblical truth? Will I live securely under the leadership of King Jesus? Ask yourself, will I walk faithfully in my home, in my job, in our community?